Hi, thanks for coming everyone to this great forum with the Railroad Workers United. And thank you very much to everybody that showed up to the rally at the Federal Railroad Administration. And we're going to start tonight's festivities with Ashley Williams, who is a representative of STAND. And they're the organization, national organization that called for the week of action today against the bomb trains.
Hi guys, thank you so much for being here tonight. As Lori said, we just got back from a protest at the Federal Railroad Administration's office. I thought it was pretty effective. We had about 30 people turn out for it. And this is kind of a response to Charles Paddock, and he had written 2 letters to the FRA, and we have not received a response, so we took it upon ourselves to take this call to action and protest outside that. So that's just one in the sequence of the Stop Oil Trains Week of Action that I am the Midwest Regional Coordinator for with Stand.Earth. So I was tapped to do this a few months ago, and I've been coordinating actions all over in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, and Michigan, as well as here in Illinois. So I'm so happy to be with you here tonight. So what we are demanding in this week of action is that each and every one of you to call to the attention the threat of dangerous oil trains going through our communities. As an estimated 40 trains go through our communities each week, carrying about an estimated 3 million gallons of oil. And that number is just insanity. At the national scale, about 25 million Americans live along these blast zones, these 25 American homes. And again, that's another really, really astounding number. So we're trying to put that in perspective, and we're trying to ask that the federal government stop playing this rail Russian roulette with our health and safety, and really to prioritize it. So we want to see to it that accidents and tragedies such as what happened in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, never happen never repeated, and never happened in communities such as Chicago. And so what I wanted to do right now in commemorating the 3rd anniversary and remembering the lives of those that were lost in the train derailment, I wanted to have a moment of silence for these 47 residents, aging from 93 to as young as 4 years old. So these are just a few of the pictures of these residents. So if you could join me in a moment of silence. All right, thank you so much, everyone. It's with a heavy heart that I open up this RW Forum, and I would like to hand it over to Dr. Lori Chamberlain. But before I do that, I always remembered that I was going to let Michelle talk to us just for a second. She actually is the one that opened up this UE Hall for us tonight. So thank you so much, Michelle, and we're so pleased that you did that. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Michelle Burke. I'm from the UE here, Local 1177. We actually have our office upstairs. Yeah, we're more than proudly welcome to RWU here because of our partnership with them. We transport, what I do, I work for Halcon. We transport these crews around anywhere all over the US. So we transport them, we deal with them on a daily basis, we work with them face to face. So we're happy to have this partnership with them, and we're happy to welcome them here anytime. Oh, and also one other thing, if anybody's drinking water out of the bottles, we do have a bag behind where the water is, back on the table. Please put your bottles in that bag. Any trash goes in the black trash can back there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you, UE, for this beautiful hall. And thank you, Mark Burrows, who is a retired union member. He worked as a locomotive engineer for 37 of the last 42 years until he retired in January. He's been a longtime member of the United Transportation Union, representing his local 1433 as their delegate to the last 2 international conventions. He was a former co-chair of the Railroad Workers United, Crosscraft Inter-Union Caucus of Rail Labor Activists across North America. I think we all know that there's multiple unions in the railroad business, and sometimes they work together and sometimes they don't. Is that a good summation? Okay, there you go. So Railroad Workers United strives to collectively strengthen their respective unions in order to more effectively fight for dignity on and off the job, as well as to challenge the profit-driven, unsafe railroad operations that threaten not only the workforce, but the surrounding communities as well. So he's perfectly suited to come and talk to us about the workers' issues around the oil trains. And what we're going to do is we have 4 topics that he's going to discuss. And after each topic, we're going to have a short discussion. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, just raise your hand and I'll do a little stack. I'm so sorry? Yeah, go up to the mic for a question. And okay, I don't have to do a stack. You'll go up to the mic for a question and comment. But what we're going to do is he'll talk to us for 10 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes of discussion. Then he'll come back with 10 minutes, and I don't have a bullwhip. I don't have, any sort of electronic equipment here. If we go over a little bit, that's fine. But we're going to have 10 minutes of him discussing a certain topic, 10 minutes of conversation, and then we'll go back to Mark talking about another topic in 10 minutes. So if you don't get your question the first 10 minutes of discussion, just wait and you can bring it up the next time as well. Is that cool? Okay, so the first topic that he's going to discuss is the need for a labor community alliance. Let's welcome Mark Burrows.
All right, thank you all very much. Once again, thanks to Michelle and the United Electrical Union for donating this hall. So on behalf of Railroad Workers United, I want to thank you all for coming. I feel that not only is it a moral imperative to stand in solidarity with the residents of Lac-Mégantic, I may not be pronouncing that in proper French, but it's a moral imperative to stand in solidarity with the residents there, both the victims and the survivors, on this 3rd anniversary of that horrific tragedy. But it's also empowering for all of us here tonight and across the continent as we serve notice on the rail carriers, as well as the U.S. and Canadian governments, that we are not going to sit back and allow business as usual while another Lac-Mégantic, or worse, remains a potential disaster waiting to happen. Tonight we pay our respect to the 47 victims whose lives were sacrificed in cold blood on the altar of corporate greed by calling out that corporate greed and standing up to the modern-day robber rail barons and their enablers in government. That being said, to keep things in perspective, this is just one front of many fronts on the universal struggle for social, economic, political, and environmental justice. Recently, I was honored to speak on behalf of Railroad Workers United at the Break Free Midwest Rally in Whiting, Indiana, back on May 15th. I was moved by the range of issues and constituencies that were represented, from the speaker's podium to the hundreds in attendance. This was a significant gathering of activists fighting so many forms and manifestations of injustice and raw indignations, including, but not limited to, the willful poisoning of Southeast Side residents by the Koch brothers uncovered piles of pet coke dust blowing in the wind, Michigan residents affected by the Enbridge Corporation pipeline spill in the Kalamazoo River several years ago, water shutoffs in Detroit, water poisoning in Flint, just to name a few grievances. I've got to stop here for a second because as indignations go, all I could say was wow when I first learned this particular fact. Most, if not all of you may be aware of this particular fact, but I feel it merits a shout out. When the unelected emergency manager switched the Flint water supply from the Detroit River to save a few bucks, after a while the General Motors assembly plant complained to the powers that be that this new and improved cost-effective water source was damaging these brand new automobile engines. So the GM plant was allowed to switch back to the Detroit River, the original water source, while the residents continued to drink the poisoned water. It was only months later when the lab test came in response to the justified outrage of the community, were they forced to switch back for the community. This serves as a classic poster child example of callous indifference by powers that be to our needs, rights, and entitlements as human beings, and a case could be made that this is downright criminal. Going back to this Break Free rally, when Naomi Davis from Blacks in Green, one of the MCs, began to introduce me, she improvised a little, taking a minor artistic liberty with the dry, to-the-point, straightforward bio I had presented to the organizers, so much so that at first I thought she must be talking about somebody else, even though I thought I was scheduled to speak. When she introduced Tara Huska, the indigenous liaison, I hope I pronounced that right, always had trouble with that word, to the Sanders campaign, I was profoundly moved by her editorial ad-libbing. In referencing the indisputably harsh treatment of this continent's original inhabitants, she cited this as possibly the first scenario where I quote her, that certain people were disposable, that certain people, their lives did not matter. And I thought about the dozens and dozens of rail workers who've died in recent years in accidents where speed up and or profit-driven cutbacks in manpower and or maintenance was the major contributing factor. Their lives did not matter to the rail bosses and the regulatory agencies whose mission it is to protect workers and the public, just as the lives of the residents of Lac-Mégantic did not matter, or Flint, Michigan for that matter, and of course could go on and on. I want to thank Ms. Green for connecting those obvious dots for me, such a basic fundamental concept that in my personal opinion is one of the common threads that brings us here tonight. Irregardless of the conclusions of rigged grand juries, biased prosecutors, and judges in bench trials, I don't think I'm going out on a limb here by stating the obvious that the lives of Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Rekia Boyd, Laquan McDonald, to name a few, their lives did not matter to the various entities whose publicly stated mission was to serve and protect them. Bazillions of dollars in literal blood money settlements doesn't change that reality. When corporate entities sanctioned by local, state, and federal governments willfully poison the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, destroy the environment and ecology, to them our lives don't matter, much less the lives of future generations. Back in 2010, 29 coal miners died at the Massey coal mine in West Virginia, which had a long history of flagrant safety violations. Their lives didn't matter, just as the 11 workers who died in the BP accident, I believe it was that same year in the Gulf of Mexico. President Obama recently acknowledged that in spite of their best attempts at being judge, jury, and executioner of bad guys in the Mideast and Africa, that unfortunately their high-tech drones did accidentally manage to kill a few innocent civilians. Half-assed apologies and insulting compensation to victims' families aside, add them to the list of lives that don't matter. Working people whose standard of living is being cut to the bone to pay the interest to the bondholders from Michigan to Greece to Puerto Rico, their lives don't matter. And a special shout out to the Chicago Teachers Union here in Chicago, fighting for their own dignity and for the quality of education for the children of Chicago. To meet the CTU's demands, the city says that I'll have to pay higher taxes. They conveniently ignore the fact that I'm already paying higher taxes to cover all their multi-bazillion-dollar settlements for police misconduct that seldom is anyone ever held accountable for. To the corporations, bondholders, and governments that enable them, our lives may not matter, but we're here to say that our lives and the lives of others do matter. The bosses in government are masters at playing divide and conquer. Recently, Murray Energy announced that it was closing several coal mines, putting thousands of coal miners out of work. The CEO made a point to blame the Obama's environmental policies. Translated, blaming environmental activists who are guilty of wanting clean air, water, and soil and food, slowing down the effects of climate change. They're responsible for the economic devastation of thousands of workers who had the misfortune of being dependent on working in these mines. This is classic divide and conquer. They try to pit us, foreign-born versus native-born, environmentalists versus workers in these industries, public workers versus taxpayers, et cetera, et cetera. Rallies like the Break Free that I referred to Our recent rail safety conferences that we've put together in collaboration with various environmental organizations in the last few years, meetings like this is an important pushback on those efforts to divide us. We may not agree on everything at this point in time, but we start with our common ground. We all have far more in common than our differences. So we start with that common ground and fight together. And in the course of that dynamic, we talk, we listen to each other, we exchange our ideas, our experiences, our observations, and we try to learn from each other. We have fraternal discussions, civilized, respectful debate. What demands, tactics, strategies do we need to move forward? We are against powerful adversaries, corporations, governments. It's going to take a massive movement to fight for the just demands that we fight for. This is an oversimplification, but and this is just my personal opinion now, but I picture the forces that came together with the labor uprisings in Madison a few years ago against Governor Walker's austerity and union busting, the Occupy movement and massive mobilizations for immigrant rights that we've seen on previous May Days, the original holiday for the working class around the world. When all of these forces can be coalesced, galvanized into a mass movement, the question will get posed, what do we do with that? Where can we go? Meetings like this point in that direction, and I just want to encourage this deepening collaboration. One of the driving forces that led to the Coalition of Railroad Workers United was that, as Dr. Laura pointed out, that by being divided into over a dozen different craft unions, the rail bosses just have their way with us. They work out a sweetheart deal with one union, and then that sets the bar for all the rest, and that's a contributing factor to how we've ended up in the pretty dire straits we've ended up. We try to revive the legacy of Eugene Debs, who attempted to organize railroad workers into one industrial union back in the 1890s. Debs and the American Railway Union were winning the Pullman strike in 1894 when the strike in the American Railway Union was crushed by the federal militia. In 1979, Bernie Sanders did a documentary on Eugene Debs, and I highly recommend that you check it out. It's about 30 minutes. It's profoundly enlightening and thought-provoking. Do a basic search for Sanders documentary on Debs, and you should find one with 29-minute options on YouTube. As he served 6 months in the Woodstock County Jail, he contemplated how even when workers were so organized as they were for the Pullman strike, that their strength and unity could be shattered so effortlessly. He arrived at various conclusions, and he dedicated the rest of his life to building a movement, an alliance of the working class and all of our natural allies to galvanize and utilize our overwhelming numerical majority overall, along with the decisive economic power of those of us who create the wealth in this country, in the factories, farms, mills, mines, and railroads. He posed the fundamental question: should society be run by a tiny minority to expand their wealth at our expense, or should we, the vast majority, through true democratic institutions, have the final say as to how the wealth we create be allocated? He actually got close to 1 million votes running for president as a socialist back in 1912, and then in 1920 also from jail, where he was given a 10-year sentence for telling the truth about what World War I was all about. My personal opinion is that this is the fundamental question we are grappling with as we try to fight for a better world in the workplace, in our communities, and in society as a whole. And again, meetings like this help take us in that direction.
Okay, so questions about a labor and community alliance? Come on up to the microphone. And Mark, you'll have to come back here to answer any. Do we have any questions on this part of the program? If you do, come on up and just come up to the microphone. Yay, great.
One reason we want to have everybody come to the mic is CAN TV is taping this for future showing, and so if you need to put the mic down to, okay.
Lieutenant Freeport, vertically challenged. I have a question specifically about Community and Labor Alliance, and relates to about 6 months ago, I went to a meeting in Riverside where the president of Barrington, the community of Barrington, said she had launched an effort because she was very concerned that there was a near explosion on the tracks that went to Barrington. And I just wonder if the labor organization has had any contact with this woman in Barrington. And I know in the community I live in the western suburbs, we have 1.5 mile oil trains going through the center of town that sit there for a day. So there's a lot of communities outside of Chicago who are very interested in doing something about this and like to know if anyone has made an effort to be in touch with the president of Barrington.
My answer to that is please give them Railroad Workers United information, I mean, this is something very new. Briefly, over the years, when my coworkers would ask me, how do we ever get past the legal straitjacket of the Railway Labor Act, which makes it basically illegal for us to strike? My answer would be, well, we need to plead our case to the community that if they really knew the danger that they were in by the reckless policies, they would be horrified and they would support us. It's when we started, when the Burlington Northern tried to impose a one-man agreement, engineer-only agreement on their workers a couple years ago, this big giant light bulb lit up the tremendous support we got in the community to aid us and the workers at the BN in pushing this back. So this is a very new rail workers reaching out to the community to discuss this. It's a very new thing, and it's a work in progress. And so whatever we can do to broaden it with the people that you're talking about, I'm all for it.
I can answer it a little bit of it. One more comment.
I attended the People's Summit, where there were probably 50 organizations, one of them being the National Nurses Union from California. And it was an extremely effective and very efficient and very well-run effort to come out of our silos. And I think that's a critical component here, is that if the railroad workers are in their silo, I think you really maybe could think a little more energetically about reaching out or maybe being the center of it. In a way, I see the railroad workers, because you are in the trains, that you could be the leaders of this effort. And I think we're all out here waiting for that to happen.
So when we had our first meeting of Chicagoland Oil by Rail, the mayor of Barrington sent her right-hand woman, her chief of staff, to that meeting. So we discussed at that meeting what were going to be our priorities, because there's tank cars and there's infrastructure and there's all sorts of things, right? So Chicagoland Oil by Rail decided that not only is the infrastructure and the tank cars and the oil should be kept in the soil, but one of the main things that could happen is that we degasify this oil to really protect our communities. And so we got behind Senator Marie Cantwell's bill, and that is the Crude by Rail Safety Act, S859. And there's a House a companion bill as well. And we would love it if some people gathered with the Chicagoland Oil by Rail and started reaching out to these mayors to really get them on board. because honestly, it's been 3 years since Lac Mégantic. And I will tell you, I talked to some of the mayors myself, and they were hoping that the Federal Railroad Administration, and they're gonna come to our rescue, and they're gonna do something, and they're not doing anything. So we need to reevaluate this whole program, and I would love it if anybody here is from a town, you know, one of the suburbs of Chicago, come up and talk to us, because you're reaching out to your mayor, which is even on our flyer, is really, really important. There's a lot of mayors that are very, very concerned, and it's very clear that the Federal Railroad Administration is not going to do what's necessary. So please come and see us. Go ahead.
With the Lac Mégantic accident, there are two people who are being brought up in court, being blamed for this accident, and I'd like to see that analyzed, and also the fact that there were two people apparently tending the train at the time. I mean, I'm not saying that I know that, but that appears to be what was going on. And if the fact that if this accident occurred, I mean, what if there had been 5, like the picture on the front of the highball this time, that they have reduced it from 5 to 2, and they're trying for 1. I wish somebody would just talk about that relative to Lac Mégantic.
You have your wish, my dear, because the next topic that Mark is going to cover is factors leading to the Lac Mégantic tragedy. So he will cover that in the next session. Go ahead.
I wasn't going to speak, but being as how the topic
Right in
is,
the mic, okay?
being as how the topic is labor community. The last time there was a cross-craft coalition of railroad workers, in reality, was in the 1920s. And at the time there was 2 million railroad workers. At every town had numerous shops, communities that supported, that were the people lived in, like Pullman, that I live in now. And it was a different world. Now we have 20,000. We have 13. I'm just going to list some of the factors that make the emergence of this unity that we see here so great. The people that are here, this movement of fighting for a safe environment and against climate change and against oil, is really one of the, if not the most live and active movement in the country. And that's who's populating this meeting, and that's what's so great, is to have a connection. You won't see a meeting of 50 railroad workers putting on a forum. Why? Because they can't get off work. Because they work 28 out of 30 days. They can't get permission. They're on call. A craft worker like me has a regular schedule. Nobody else does. They don't do, and we will never end up really doing public work. We have to have a dynamic connection with activists like you and the community and the left. With that, we will be able to accomplish a lot. Our unions are a shell of unions. I won't go into detail. There's 13 of them at least on each job site. They do cut each other's throats, steal each other's jobs. Railroad, their own membership, collaborated in firing me twice. And, but they could, rank and file could take them over and build a real movement. So I just wanted to put some kind of perspective on this, how important the people in this room are. That if you can convince and network with the people that are working, convincing them that a future could be held for them and for everybody, while not endangering their jobs, fighting for their issues, and you're fighting they're fighting for each other's issues, we could really have a future. So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming here.
Thank you. That's great. Yep, you're right. So we got started a little bit late, so we're going to wrap up the comments at this time for this discussion, this part of the discussion. And the next topic that Mark is going to cover is factors leading to Lac Mégantic tragedy.
And I think the second half of that was drop the charges against Harding and LaBerge.
Sorry about that.
No problem, no problem. What I want to do here is make the case for the pattern of ruthless cost cutting and corner cutting for years on the Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic, the railroad where this tragedy happens. And most of this comes from studies and research by the local regional police, the Transportation Safety Board, which is the equivalent of our National Transportation Safety Board, and Transport Canada, which is the equivalent of the FRA. And the point being, where I'm going with that is to make the case that the two workers, Harding, the locomotive engineer Tom Harding and the train director on duty at the time, Richard LaBerge, are being scapegoated to deflect from these very ugly facts and realities. Some of you may know some, if not all, of these facts. I just learned some more as I was doing some research. But there was a significant development in March of this year that if I had not been in the Railroad Workers United loop, I probably would not know. So I want to just cover some basic things here before I get into the actual incident. One of these studies pointed out that 10 years of cost cutting, deferred maintenance by the Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic. 8 months prior, the locomotive engine, the lead locomotive, the 5017, that ended up burning, and that's why the fire department had to come and shut it down, had been sent to a repair facility. And the material, they used some kind of like epoxy. The material lacked the strength and durability, and it failed. It did not fix the problem. And this ultimately led to engine surges, excessive black and white smoke, and ultimately led to a big oil leak, and the oil accumulated in the body of the turbocharger, overheated, and caught fire that fateful night. So, you know, that's had this engine been properly maintained, that train doesn't go down the hill. The siding in Nantes, outside of town, is 6 to 8 miles west of Lac Mégantic. That siding, it's very common for sidings. For those, just for technical clarification, sidings are like tracks that go off the main line. Many times they're used when you have single track, and so you have trains going in both directions. One train will take the siding, get off the main, and the other train keeps going, and then that train, you know, after their permission that they're staying the clear until certain trains go by, then they come out of the siding and proceed onward. So that's what a siding is. This particular siding, and it's also common to park, when you have to park a train and leave it unattended, it's common to park the train on the siding. And many sidings have either electrical or manual derails. And what those are, they actually, if a train gets away, it will go on the ground. It will simply derail it. These are protections that have existed and been utilized in the industry for years to prevent, as an extra backup. The siding in Nantes had these derails, but they were using it as a storage, as a parking lot for empty boxcars. And so that's why the train was not parked in this safe siding where it would have been protected by derails, and that's why it was left on the main. Another issue here, and I'll get back, you know, many of these issues are going to kind of overlap of the four categories, but the single employee crew issue comes into play here because if there had been a conductor on the train, they could have parked the train further back on level ground. They would have had to cut a public crossing. Okay, well, that entails, you know, a second man to do that work. But because the train was being operated engineer only, they were given special exemptions by both Transport Canada and the Federal Railway Administration, because part of that railroad operates through territories in Maine. So not only did they have to get a special exemption to run engineer only from Canada, the FRA has some of this blood on their hands also. This grade is a 1.2 slope. It's the steepest grade east of the Rockies. So to park a train of 10,000 tons like this, when there were other options, again, I hold the MMA responsible. One of the studies pointed out that it's unusual to park trains on the main, but there were no regulations against it. Harding had reported the engineer, Tom Harding, had reported mechanical difficulties on this locomotive with excessive, you know, that it was getting excessive smoke. And when he parked the train, told the dispatcher again, and then it was just kind of understood that, well, we'll worry about it in the morning. So one of the big disputes is the rule says 9 handbrakes. He's alleged that he only tied 7. But studies have, and that's what the rule said, 9 handbrakes are required. Studies that they did said that it would have taken 15 to 25 handbrakes to properly secure that tonnage on that grade. When about 2350, he'd parked the train at 2300, and at 2350 the 911 call came in on the locomotive fire, and the MMA was notified. I think the crew dispatcher informed Harding, or the train dispatcher informed Harding, and that something was going on, and the tapes of these calls show that Harding asked, should I go out there? You know, should I go out there and make sure that everything is okay? And the response was no, because they didn't want to interrupt his legally mandated rest. So they sent a track maintenance supervisor unfamiliar with train air brakes. So the fire department cuts the engine, kills the engine to put the fire out. They sent a track maintenance supervisor to make sure that everything's okay. He knows nothing about restarting engines. He knows nothing about the implications for the train air brake system. And so he says everything's okay. It ended up going downhill. Once with the engine shut down at a certain point. Here's another thing, and I'll get to this later. We wondered, when we first heard about this, we wondered as rail workers, how could the train brakes bleed off so quickly in such a short time, in approximately 2 hours? That didn't make sense. It didn't compute, and we would find out later. Heat from these fires, so the train hit a maximum speed of 63 miles an hour on a curve that was had been restricted to 10 miles an hour. Heat from the fires were felt 1.2 miles away. There's stories of people jumping from the third floor. The oil entered storm sewers, and then huge fires emerged from the manholes and chimneys and basements in the area. After that, then Transport Canada came to the conclusion that maybe it wasn't a good idea to leave trains with hazardous materials like that parked on the main line. They came out with that advisory on July 19th. Transport Canada issued a notice of non-compliance to 6 different segments of track were found to be fair to substandard rail, bad rail, deteriorated track ties, which legally must be fixed, including defective ties on a section near a propane facility. So again, I say all this just to make the case that the Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic had just been a rogue, renegade outfit. We have alerters. Back in the olden days, we had dead man's pedal, where you had to keep your foot put on this pedal, and if you didn't keep your foot on it, then it would come up, and then it would take the air and stop the train. So they replaced those. With what's called an alerter. When nothing changes on the locomotive for any period of time, whether it be throttle movement or air, taking air, if nothing changes, then the alerter goes off, makes a noise, flashes, and you just push a button to acknowledge it to say, yes, I'm still breathing and I still have a pulse. And if you don't acknowledge the alerter, then it will, after maybe like 10 seconds, they're all programmed and calibrated differently, but they're designed to then take the air of the train, which will ultimately stop it. This alerter on this lead locomotive had been hot-wired, and it was not properly functioning, number one. And then another little tidbit was these alerters are designed also when the brake pressure on these road locomotives, the engine brake pressure is 70 psi. When the pressure gets down to 24 psi, that will set the alerter off. In other words, it will set the brakes up before too much air is lost, that, you know, at a certain point you're not able to set the brakes. But that feature doesn't work when the train brakes are in release. There were defects on the locomotives. A pressure regulator, a bad order pressure regulator, would have allowed the brakes to set on one of the dead locomotives. He had shut, there were 5 locomotives, he had shut 4 of them down for fuel conservation and left the lead locomotive running, which is the one that caught fire. There's another thing called an overspeed control. And engines are rated for, you know, anywhere from 60 to 70 maximum. Those kind of road locomotives are rated for anywhere from 70 to 60, and these alerters can be programmed to go off and stop the train in such a situation. That was just a technical thing that they chose not to invest in. Protective devices in both the locomotive and the rear end, and the rear end device at the end of the train can be programmed to stop the train before the pressure gets too low. In August 2014, the Transportation Safety Board issued its report that 18 distinct causes and contributing factors, many of them influencing and building on top of one another, were contributing factors, while always emphasizing that, you know, but if Harding had, had set proper handbrakes. They've monitored other workers afterward to verify that Harding's MO was how Harding functioned was how many other workers functioned, especially workers engineer only. Crews that work with an engineer conductor, it was found that they did things a bit differently, but crews that were working by themselves. So there was a safety culture problem here. And when this first happened, like I said, we trying to understand how the air brakes could bleed off so quickly. I've asked different people what happens. You can bring a train in the yard and then you cut away from it and you tie handbrakes down and it's left in a state of emergency, and eventually all that air will bleed off and the air brakes will release, and that's why you tie handbrakes. You don't rely on the air brakes. That's why you tie handbrakes to supplement that. And various opinions, 8, 12, 24 hours, but certainly not 2 hours. The reason that the air brakes released so quickly is that they were never set. We found this out in March, and it blew our minds because all rail workers, the standard policy for leaving a train unattended is to set the train brakes and then back that up with hand brakes. A proper handbrake test is to then release all your air brakes and see if the handbrakes hold. And so the reason that there was no train brake set, this absolutely blew our minds. It was a story, a reporter in the Toronto Globe and Mail first broke the story, and we don't know exactly how he got hip to that, but this was actually the policy. This was the rules. And so Transport Canada sanctioned this policy, and the reason being that if you set the train brakes, well then when the next engineer comes, it may take him 15, 30 minutes to recharge the air brake system. So to save, and it can take longer in the wintertime, valves freeze and stuff like that. So to save a few minutes of production here and there, so that the engineer can get on and go, rather than take 15, 30 minutes to pump the train up, so that he has adequate air to operate safely. It was a policy to not set the train brakes on an unattended train. And this is probably the most criminal cost-cutting practice. Even without insufficient handbrakes, had the train brakes been set on that train does not roll away. So 7 to 9 handbrakes, did he, didn't he? As far as we're concerned, that's not the question. The issue here is that all of these cost-cutting policies by the Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic, sanctioned by Transport Canada, and in some cases by the U.S. government's Federal Railway Administration, I believe all of this makes the case that they are responsible, and if anybody should be put on trial for criminal negligence resulting in 47 deaths, it should be the officials of the MMA at the very least. And when Tom Harding was arrested, and Tom Walsh, his lawyer, has told me this story personally. He attended our rail safety conference here in Chicago and came to our convention. And so he talks about this. This was all brewing, and he knew where this was headed. He knew charges were coming. And so he approached what he calls the Crown. He approached the Crown and told them, look, I'm going on vacation soon, in a couple days. If you're going to do something, let's do it now, and, I'll bring them in, and we'll do this all nice and orderly, formally, protocol, and otherwise, if you're not ready, if you don't have your ducks lined up to do it in the next couple days, in the next week, then, would you please do us the courtesy, just wait till I get back, and, and then, we'll surrender him, and, do things all by the book. I guess they acknowledged him, but apparently gave him no guarantee, probably even if they did, He went away from that discussion not too concerned. So once he was safely away on vacation, they came to his house in a, like they were raiding a drug dealer, guns to his head, put him on the ground, cuffed him in front of his kids, lead him away, in a big drug bust type scenario, shackle, or handcuffs and all of that. It's just so vile, and all of this just points that this is an attempt to simply scapegoat these two workers to deflect attention. What's also been brought to my attention recently is, so not only are we fighting these criminal charges, but we want to address this also as a civil liberties case, and hopefully people like the ACLU and others will see it in that way. The charges and the merits of the case aside, but Walsh has asked, an evidentiary hearing where the prosecutor and the defense exchange, this is normal operating procedure in any civil criminal court, where he simply asked the prosecution, how are you, give us, how are you going to make this case? Give us this, what you've got, so we can properly defend against it. And they've just been blown off. They just recently went to court earlier this, a couple weeks ago, and the judge did rule that they have to comply with this, with this part of the process. But the bottom line is, these workers are being scapegoated to deflect attention from the criminal cost cutting of the MMA, and we say drop the charges now, and we hope that we feel it's going to take a tremendous movement to, I don't like his chances of getting justice in the courts, but I do like his chances of getting justice in the court of public opinion, and hopefully all of you will, not only with our highball, there's a new site now, and it's on your program, the hardingdefense.org, and a lot of these a lot of this stuff that I've mentioned and referred to. So I urge you all to go there and really get educated on this and join us in this movement to, and also there's a petition, when you go to that website, there's a petition if you're convinced that the charges should be dropped. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, so we're seriously over time, but that was beautiful. And it's really quite disturbing that the railroad is epoxying their train engine together. It's quite disturbing to me. So, and among many things that you said were disturbing. So how about if we, after this, there's a scheduled break. And I'd like to make that just a 5-minute break, just a quick pee-pee. If you want to go pee-pee. And then we'll come back, and then we'll be closer to the time. So does anybody have questions for Mark about, the Lac-Mange Antique tragedy and Tom Harding? And I am going to take my microphone here and ask for the first one. And that is, did the Canadians in their list of contributing, the Canadian government in their list of contributing factors, did they factor in the fact that this was North Dakota Bakken oil that had a very high percentage of butane, ethane, and methane in it and was mislabeled as crude oil? So crude oil is not typically that flammable or explosive. So was that part of the contributing factor?
In the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of these various studies and analysis, there is reference to that. Okay, so all that aside, they're still trying to crucify Harding and LeBrook.
So Lac Mégantic would have been a horrible disaster, but it wouldn't have burned a town down, and it wouldn't have killed 47 people if the oil had been degasified. It would no longer be so flammable or explosive. So, okay, Paul.
Just a quick question: is this something that a lot of railroad workers have knowledge of, or are they being misled? What is the general consensus among railroad workers that what you're saying is correct, or what do you think?
That's a good question. Right now, we're one of the only, the Militant newspaper has been publishing important articles on this to get the truth out. Railroad Workers United has been trying to get the truth out. But it's a real battle, and there may be others that, and if I'm not giving anybody their props, I'm just not aware. So, but these two I'm definitely aware. And when it first happened, it was a real hot topic of discussion. Rail workers are just catching hell from every which way, in every which way. And unfortunately, it should be, but it's not yet. And they should take, and we certainly are going to do everything we can to get this out to rail workers as well as the public, because this could be any rail worker. This could be any rail worker getting crucified for the rock and a hard place situation that we get put in by the bosses. So it's going to be a struggle. We're working on it. That's the best answer I can give right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment if you want to comment on it. Just that this case, my name is Laura Anderson. I'm a conductor in Norfolk Southern, and just recently went back to work after one of the layoffs we'll read in Highball. It talks about how thousands have been laid off on the railroad, but some of us are coming back. Anyway, and we're facing the conditions that everybody's talking about here. This fight to drop the charges against Harding and Labrie. Labrie was the dispatcher. I think most people here probably heard that communication on TomHardingDefense.com, and if you haven't, listen to it. And Mark referred to it. Because he's like going up the hill, he's like, oh, my engine's smoking, and he's telling him, and he's like, just going up the hill, the steepest route in the whole area is where they put their train. They park it on the steepest route in the entire region. I think these facts are really interesting about this engine. It doesn't surprise me at all. We have engines like that all the time. It's that's all you got to take it. And, the fact is workers are working with these conditions all the time. We're getting set up every day. So, there are some fights by workers going on today, when we talk about what kind of leadership we need. So we start to try to transform ourselves, fight for better conditions, and fight for the cities and towns we live in, and the conditions and the air we breathe, and the better drinking water, whatever it is we need. But to develop a leadership, we got to go through struggles, and we need confidence. And there's one example in South Bend. There's a lockout of UAW workers for Honeywell, and in Harrisburg, I think it's Harrisburg, Metropolis. Honeywell makes nuclear. I forgot what do you call it? Yeah. Yes. Yes, and they had a huge lockout, and they had a whole cemetery of those who died in the community, those who died in the factory from producing this nuclear material. And the same, Honeywell is now locked out, and they're turning into a fight in South Bend. Join the picket line. Workers need to see and join picket lines and get more confidence and see who their allies are and see who their enemies are. And things like a report to that union or any union or non-union workplace about this fight is important. To show an example of a fight against a frame-up, because you're next, you know, and how big this frame-up is, and it reveals all of us, so you can see, it reveals who's the real enemy, how the owners of the railroad, the producers of all the energy, not it's oil, but it's all energy under capitalism. They just think profit, including windmills or whatever it is. It's like just a little side thing. Where Obama visited this windmill factory in Iowa, there's 60% turnaround. The workers have 60% turnaround because they've been trying to get a union in, they can't get it in. If they breathe in the glass stuff it's made of, all the chemicals are dumped in the worst way. So, you know, they're making lots of money off of the windmills, and it's how you produce it and who is in control of production. But that's going to take revolutionary change. But on our road to that, workers we need jobs. In our movement, we need to fight for things we need. So we need jobs to fix things we need, the infrastructure, right? How do we get clean drinking water? How do we get daycare centers? Whatever it is, that's got to be part of it. So, but this fight around drop the charges is part of what can strengthen us. If we explain it, and most workers can relate to it, because every day, not just railroad workers, all factory workers, production workers who work around explosives or chemicals or, you know, whatever we do. There's so many rules against us. They want to blame us when something happens, and they don't give a crap about the environment or our bodies. We're just numbers. So I just want to bring it to your church, bring it to your union, learn about this defense case.
We're trying to make them shorter comments. How's that?
Yes, well, this is going to be very short. I'm Vince Hart from Warrenville, Illinois, and a member of Chicagoland Oil by Rail. Mark, one thing you did not mention this time, but I'm sure you can make us aware of it, is the Chicago connection of Chicagoland, of the Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic Railway, in terms of their chairman of the board, who has not been charged with anything.
I was actually going to reference Mr. Burkhart, who you're referring to. At the end, I was going to say a few things about the struggle on the Wheeling and Lake Erie, where the workers are on the front line against single-employee crews. And he had a notorious reputation here with the Wisconsin Central, moved on to the MMA, and also has his hands in this Wheeling and Lake Erie struggle. So, yeah, as rail robber villains go, Burkhart is right up there, absolutely.
Just a short comment about the situation of the railroad workers. I'm a car inspector, and I was licensed by the government to inspect mechanically every single freight car. The wheels are good, the brakes are good, etc. So the situation of the individual worker is expressed by this contradiction. On the one hand, as a group, we could make it completely safe or stop all oil now. We've got the power of stop production completely. That's a huge amount of power. On the other hand, the situation we find ourselves in is that, like the engineer, I could be held responsible if some defect was found that caused a derailment. They can find the individual, they can fire you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So your daily pressure to just do what you're told and not being backed up by your union in most cases is a huge situation, and that leads to people adapting. If you don't have enough people you do what you got to do to keep your job. You try to make it as safe as possible. And that's, again, why I'm going to say the same thing every time, and maybe I won't speak anymore, but that it's so important that you people are here and that you have more access to the public. That, in addition to the invention of the internet, there wouldn't have been a movement without the internet. So I just wanted to say that to reach out, to find ways to connect with these union halls, union meetings, any kind of gatherings, and assure them that we could build a movement to defend them if they try to fight for safety against their companies.
Great, thank you. And we're going to take you up on that stop of the oil trains completely pretty soon. We're headed to that point where we are going to have a general strike in order to get movement on climate change. We can't just go down with the ship, you guys. We are headed to the point of no return. One more comment, and then we're going to take just a 5-minute break, and the toilets are downstairs, both of male and female downstairs, and just make it quick and come on back so we can wrap up earlier. Thanks.
I had a question about, this is trivial, that when you park a train and it is crossing a public way, then you need more than one person, because it sounds to me like you have to decouple the train, clear the public way, and then when you want to start the train up again, couple it back. And that was my first question, because I didn't understand that comment. And the second question I had is, when Mr. Harding set those 7 brakes, and then he went on his own BREAK, his shift was over, and he was entitled to some rest. And how much time would have taken him to do the 2 others? And like you said, it wouldn't have made any difference because the air brakes were drained. But I just wonder, how long does it take to set a brake, and why were there 9? Does that mean there were 9 cars? Why were there 9 brakes? I know nothing about railroading.
Real quickly, so to cut a public crossing, generally it requires an engineer in the engine and a conductor on the ground. You've got to tie handbrakes on the stuff that you're leaving behind, and make the cut, pull the pin, and now with the remote control technology, and this goes on in some places where a single employee crew can wear a remote control and control the engine with a little video, with a little box on his. So it's not impossible for one person to do that, but that's generally, fortunately, that's still the norm at this point in time. There were 72 cars, 72 loads of this oil, over 100,000 tons in each car. It takes a few minutes per car to tie a handbrake. A handbrake is kind of usually it's some kind of a high tension chain that's either cranked with a wheel or a crank lever, one of the two. And so you got to climb up the ladders, get on the platform, position yourself safely. So it's a few minutes. It's definitely a few minutes per car. And so had Harding come out, he would have restarted the engine, because he knew that because all that was really holding the train was the locomotive engine brakes and the 7 or 9 or however many handbrakes. Okay, as long as the engine was running, there was sufficient air in the system to even without these 72 loads, with no train brakes on them, but just the 5 engine brakes and the hand brakes, as long as the engine was running, it kept the air going to keep those engine brakes. You have train brakes and then you have engine brakes, 2 separate brake systems. And so had they suggested, yeah, you know what, we'll get you a cab and bring you back out there. You're the only real qualified rail in the vicinity, so we'll break your rest, go out, make sure everything's okay, then we'll restart your legally mandated rest, and your next train will, be delayed for a couple hours or whatever, So yeah, if they would have just said, yeah, that's a good idea, why don't you go out there? He would have started the engine, and we're not talking about this tonight. For years, been on the railroad since 1974. Once I came to understand what was posed, one of my biggest concerns had always been that there could be an accident in a heavily populated metropolitan area with a train wreck involving ammonia or chlorine or liquefied petroleum gas. Ammonia and chlorine, those are like instant death if you're downwind. And LP gas, it's estimated that 1 LP gas will cause about a quarter-mile radius of rubble. And even if you stopped oil trains today, communities that are anywhere near rail lines are still very much in harm's way for a variety of reasons. And I just want to cover the basics. I'm going to try to blast through this. There's 4 basic major components to unsafe railroading operations. Number 1, long and heavy trains. Number 2, single employee crews. Number 3, fatigue from draconian work schedules. And 4, deferred maintenance and/or reduced deferred maintenance of infrastructure and/or reduced cost corner cutting. We saw some of that as a contributing factor, as even the government agencies acknowledged, but that's not enough to stop them from crucifying Harding and LaBrie. So as I break each of these down, some of these overlap, so I'm not going to be able to break it all down nice and neat, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. The major common thread running through all of this is the driving force is to reduce manpower. The driving force of all of these cutbacks and all of these unsafe conditions is mainly to reduce manpower because blood money overtime is simply more cost effective than the benefits that they would need to pay the extra employees to have an adequately staffed workplace. Maximize production out of the absolute least amount of workers. And this concept basically applies to almost any work environment, especially any industrial environment. Long and heavy trains. What's wrong with long and heavy trains? Let me count the ways. These days, when I started running road trains in the early 90s, 5,000, I was taking trains from Bensonville to Davenport, 5,000 feet was a healthy sized train, virtual mile long. And now they're over 2 miles long, can be anywhere from 15 to 20,000 tons. There's a lot happening there. Basically, and I'm going to try not to get too technical, but in a train there's slack between each boxcar. And it's average. There's always been. It varies. An auto rack will have a ton of, several feet of slack, cushion drawbars to keep the automobiles from being banged around, and normal, just old box cars will have much less. But the average, the way I was taught, was a 5,000-foot train would have 50 feet of slack, and so imagine a slinky, if you will, and so. How you operate a train, how you control a train is a balance of operating the locomotive, the power of the locomotive against the train braking system. I'm just going to this real briefly, but a train breaks, you basically have, say, like a 90-pound pipe running all through the train. It's connected with each boxcar. And then each boxcar has its own individual brake system. And so these train lanes are generally set at, say, 90 pounds pressure, square inch, PSI. And so when the engineer makes a reduction in that train line, in that pressure, so say you go from 90 and take a minimal reduction of, say, 6 pounds, then as that reduction flows through this, 2-mile long pipe now, as it gets to every boxcar, the braking system, nerve center in each boxcar senses this reduction and then applies the brakes. And so it doesn't happen instantly. It's not like driving a car. And so the brakes will begin to set up much quicker on the front end of the train before that reduction in the brakes set up towards the rear end. So the challenge is we're always taught to keep it stretched, to work power, because if you don't pull on it, and you set the brakes too hard, then this 50 feet can come running in at 50 miles an hour because half your brakes are set on the head end, and the other half they're not, and it comes rushing in at 50 miles, at 50 miles an hour. If it runs in like that, and you're on a curve, you could have a derailment, and if it runs out because you're not doing things properly, it can bust in two, and from my own experience, 5,000 feet was quite a challenge to, and I used to have to, I ran with cabooses and had a conductor in the back. And so if you can imagine, I was taught as a kid, you want to run this train so you don't spill the conductor's coffee. And so it was always a badge of honor if the conductor say, hey, that was a nice smooth ride. So it's possible to run these trains to not spill his coffee, or you can send him flying out the front door of the caboose if you don't do this right. And so when you're so that alone, with these 20,000, with these 2-mile long trains, reason number one why long and heavy trains are really not a good idea. In the olden days, upon departure, when we had cabooses, when we had smaller trains and cabooses, the two hind men would inspect the train as you were pulling out. You would pull out real slow, 5 mph, and on both sides they would inspect, and they're mainly inspecting the rolling stock, making sure everything's rolling freely, so that if there's any friction, if you hear any squealing, any grinding, this tells you could have problems, because if you have indications of friction and the wheels don't roll freely, and you don't do anything about it, then eventually these wheels lock up. They get thousands of degrees in temperature from the friction and then disintegrate. Train goes on the ground, and if you have ammonia in the train in a populated area. So the guys on the caboose would inspect the trains as they went around the curves, looking for signs of smoke during the day, looking for sparks at night for this kind of friction. And so we lost the caboose decades ago, and so all of that protection is lost. They replaced the eyes of the men in the caboose with what they call hot box detectors that is supposed to detect these kind of hot wheels, hot axles, hot journal boxes, and they're spaced maybe every 30 miles, and but there's no substitute. These things still happen, okay? Yeah, they work sometimes, but they're not 100% foolproof, and there are derailments because of this. Now there's only one guy who inspects the train. Trains are running out of town. They're not properly inspected, as Steve pointed out, because the carmen are told, you must before I left where I worked, they were given 1 minute per car. And so if they didn't, they went to a track with 100 cars, and they better be done inspecting it in 100 minutes, and if not, they were fired. So these inspections are being sped up. So trains are going out not properly inspected by the carmen. They're not being inspected on their way out of town. Just so many recipes for disaster. Single employee crews. It's very important where there's constant radio communication going on in the with dispatchers and when I have a conductor on the other side, he's taking care of all of that. I'm just focused with what I described, what's involved in handling a train and keeping it in one piece and keeping it together and moving it safely. It's nice to be able to focus exclusively on that task at hand. And the conductor in the other seat, he answers the radio. He does the paperwork. We communicate. We communicate about what the speed limit is in this particular stretch of track. You might have slow orders. Normally a 50-mile-an-hour track was recently downgraded to 20. And so from point A to point B, you have to drop your speed from 50 to 20 till the whole train goes through. Work zones. Trackmen are working, and you can't proceed without their permission. You got to communicate with them, otherwise you're going to mow them down. That's their protection. And so if an engineer were to have to handle this, and here's a very frightening thing, passenger engineers, for the most part, on your suburban trains throughout the country and Amtrak, they have been running engineer only ever since they got rid of the firemen. There was a contractual protection that said there will be a fireman on the head end, and once the unions gave away the firemen, there were no rules or regulations that said, well, we still need to have a second man up there. And there was recently one of these Amtrak wrecks. They blamed the engineer for being distracted by all the radio communication. Well, yeah, duh. You know, if he would have had somebody up there, he probably wouldn't have been distracted. So and so they blame the engineer without. They don't want to touch this 800-pound gorilla in the room. That maybe there should be 2 people in passenger trains, as the freight trains try to say, see, it works in passenger, we can do it in freight. Another, Ron had pointed out, I hadn't thought about this, but if we get to engineer only, and say you're in a blizzard, okay, and then you have to throw a switch. Well, the conductor puts on his Carhartts and gets out and works up a sweat, shovels out 10 inches of snow so we can keep moving. He comes back and catches his breath and chills out, and then the engineer proceeds. Well, now, if I'm the one who's got to put my Carhartts on, go out and shovel 10 inches of snow for a half hour, very heavy physical exertion, and then I got to come back and now focus on this task, I'm not at the top of my game, okay? It's just that simple. Fatigue. Up until 2008, we were legally mandated that we had to be off work for 8 hours. Okay, so what that meant, you'd get off work, say you got off work at 4 in the afternoon. Took an hour to get home. Another hour to eat, shower, decompress. So now that's 2 hours. So you lay down, you think you might get called out, so you try to lay down. And when you're on a 24-hour extra board, you get called to work on a 2 hours notice. And so after the 6th hour, you're being called to come to work 2 hours later. That's how your 8 hours gets eaten up. So, and then when they cut to the bone with such limited manpower, you can spin 8 on, 8 off, 8 on, 8 off. 1 week I actually worked 100 hours. And I'll give you an example of what this does. On my way back from Davenport, and when I went to Davenport, I always just wanted to get my rest. I wasn't one of these, it's not like I went out to the bar or anything like that. If I went out to the bar, it was just to get one or two beers to wind down so I could get that rest. And so I was always focused on getting my rest. So in spite of my best attempts, I was generally pretty dog tired coming back. And there was a stretch of level, several miles of level terrain as we would get into the Genoa area. We'd come out of the hills around the Mississippi, and then before we got to the Elgin River Valley, it was nice and flat, and there were no public crossings. And I always scheduled, I would struggle to get to that point, and then because it was level, I could put the throttle in a certain notch, maintain the whatever speed I wanted. The track speed was 40 to 50 miles an hour. And then I could take myself a nice little cat nap, power nap for maybe 5 minutes. And then that would get me through the rest of the trip, to get through Elgin, to come through all the suburban towns, Wooddale and all of that, to get into the yard, to yard the train. I lived for that little power nap. That's how I got through. That's what I had to do to survive. So these extra, now in 2008, in all fairness, after I don't even know the exact number off the top of my head of workers who perished in fatigue-related accidents that even the Transportation Safety Board acknowledged. They finally had to concede that maybe rail workers need 10 hours off. So since that time, we've been working with 10 hours off. It took decades to get there. A lot of blood was spilled over the decades to get to that point. I talked about deferred maintenance, talked about the rolling infrastructure, boxcars and everything, but this is from the president of the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way. That's the union that basically does the track work. And he said this a couple of years ago. The president of the Track Workers Union in the U.S., the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division, notes, quote, that the BMW ED has been actively pursuing common sense track safety improvements for years. However, the industry arrogantly claims they cannot afford to maintain the tracks to a higher safety standard. So I'll just defer to his authority on track maintenance. So I'll just leave it there for now.
Anybody with questions? I have one. So, Mark, the oil trains are really long. They're at least a mile, and they're very heavy. And they have a fluid surge. They have because it's full of oil, as it's moving, it has like a swish to it. And I have heard that some of these derailments have been because they're going around a curve, and this fluid wave have, basically derailed the train. Have you had any talk with any of the workers about this fluid wave of the oil trains?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I mean, I kind of accelerated, given that we're, late on time. That's a very important issue. I'll give you an example. When I was working in the yard, and I would come out of a track with a loaded tank car, whether it be oil or, corn syrup for AMD or anything, but anything that was a loaded tank car, okay, and I had to stop at a switch, and, we got to wait for another train to clear. So I'm just sitting here. I've not even moved more than 10 miles an hour, and I've come to a stop. All right, this oil, whatever is in this car is going to be swishing back and forth. So I'm not going to say it like that one car as I'm sitting. It's violent. When it comes towards the engine, it's boom, and when it comes back, it's boom. I'm not going to say it's enough to give, one car is enough to give me whiplash, but if I had a cup of coffee on the console, it would knock it off. Just try to give you some example of the force involved of just one car. So now, multiply that force by 100 times at much higher speeds, And yeah, there are the dynamics, the physics involved in this, and then they are, all of that force gets, the weakest point is when these trains go around the curve. So that is that's a very real, we began to realize it, and it's something that it has even been talked about in industry circles, but obviously, not enough to do anything about it. I mean, if anything, there should be, there should be a set quantity of X amount. You shouldn't be running 100-car unit trains all of solid liquid commodities. That is a contributing factor, yes.
I have two questions. One is, if you would not mind talking about the derailment in Oregon, just whatever you could say about it, and how is it going to, the improvement that is supposed to have been made in the tank cars for the Bakken oil there? I thought it was going to be something that was going to be made into law, that those tank cars were going to be better.
As for the derailment in Oregon, I don't know a lot. I think the report that I heard that the initial suspected cause was a track defect. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, again, with more adequate track inspections, they have these high-tech machines that go on the rail, do like a virtual MRI. Okay. So the technology is there to constantly inspect and look for potential defects before they get to that point. But, that requires cutting into their profit margin. What was the other question? Okay, these DOT 111s. I've been hearing about these since the 70s. They've been talking about that these cars are inadequate, proposed regulations. I've been hearing this song and dance. Maybe the 70s is a slight exaggeration, but easily 30 years. I can say that with certainty, that I've been hearing this proposed, the National Transportation Board will make all kinds of recommendations, okay, and common sense regulations, and then the carriers cry, oh, it'll cost us too much money, and then the FRA says, okay, we'll give you a little bit more time, and that one's been getting strung out for 30 years easy. So I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for that whatever legislation, proposals, regulations to really be enforced in any serious way.
So you think it's more likely that degasification of the Bakken oil or the tar sands oil will take place before the cars get improved?
I mean, I'm not going to say that either.
Well, there was a railroad demo meeting March thing in Richmond, California. I happened to be there, and so I got to go to that. And they said that when coal from Utah is transported on trains in open hoppers, by the time it gets to the port to be shipped to China or wherever it's going, it has lost something like 100 pounds just from powder that has been scattered out of the coal onto the track and the surrounding area. And I wouldn't mind a comment about that either. If
I don't know that for a fact. It wouldn't surprise me. And if that is the case, a real simple solution would be heavy-duty vinyl tarp. If coal dust blowing off of coal trains is a real thing, that's easily solved, with a heavy-duty tarp. But again, you're going to cut into it. It's going to take a massive movement to fight for, you know, what's needed.
I just have a couple answers to a couple of your issues, and that is that all of the recommendations of the FRA about the tank cars and the brakes are now in litigation. It's all in the courts, so it'll be there for quite some time. And Charles is here. Yeah. How many DOT 111s have you said have been refitted already? So, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. I call them tin cans full of butane and ethane. The degasification, in the Bakken oil field, there is a plant for degasification of the Bakken oil. And we know one producer of oil has started to degasify. So it is available to them right now, and they can do it. The Federal Railroad Administration and the feds would, it would be great if they just put pressure on them to actually get it done. And again, I'm going to remind you to call your Congress critter about the Crude by Rail Safety Act, S859. It's Marie Cantwell's bill, and there is a House bill, HR 1804, and that is the bill that would get this done, degasification. It also has a lot to do with the safety issues, the cars, and there's a half-page flyer over there with this information, so call it your Congress critter. So then, do you have another? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, so you might have different cargo, you might have combined freight, I forget what that's called, mixed unit. What safety equipment are you given? What personal protective equipment are you given to protect yourself, depending on what cargo you're carrying?
I'm given earplugs to protect my hearing, and I'm given safety glasses to protect me from the coal dust. As I was getting closer to retirement, and the yard that I work was just, we were having accidents and derailments. It was really frightening, and for the reasons I talked about earlier, the possibility of there were all kind of metal crunching, and if one of those cars had been ammonia or chlorine, I probably wouldn't be here. And that was a very real possibility and remains to this day. And just for my own personal salvation, I actually really thought about investing in some kind of a mask, spending my own money to carry with me, so that if there were ever some ammonia, chlorine, LP gas thing, that I survived the initial few seconds somehow, that I could have, that I might be able to get out alive and make it to retirement. And now that's not the solution. That's just my own individual desperation, sense of survival, wanting to live. That's not the solution. But that's how real the dangers are. It has been floated. It has been floated by one of the unions about that maybe you should put some kind of mask in the engines, but that's not happening anytime soon, if ever, in my lifetime. So there's a better chance of fighting for safe railroad operations.
Okay. So the last issue that Mark's going to talk about is the struggle on the Wheeling and Lake Erie RR, workers on the front line in the fight against single employee crews.
I'm not going to say a lot about this for the sake of time. It's pretty straightforward. But before I get into that, there were a couple of thoughts that just on the previous subject I want to wrap up now. With these 2-mile plus long trains. With a 5,000-foot train, there was a chance I could feel something wrong. So even if I didn't have a guy in the caboose to eyeball it, the balance of horsepower and tonnage, if something was going wrong, you'd have a chance to feel it. You might have a few cars on the ground, but you get a feel. You know, this ain't right. I shouldn't be pulling this rough at this. You know, I'm on a straightaway. I'm on level track. I shouldn't be pulling this rough with this kind of horsepower. And so the amount of horsepower that you have to run these 15 to 20,000 tons train, you really lose that feel. And so if something does go wrong, I don't know if you know, you see these engines with these trains with engines on the rear, and so where it used to be we stretch the trains, now you keep the power shoving it in. If something goes wrong, if you go on the ground in the middle of the train, but you're not going to know it until it's busted all over the place and the train goes into emergency. So much damage is going to be done. That's another issue on long and heavy trains. The struggle on the Wheeling and Lake Erie, they have been, and as I mentioned earlier, Burkhart, originally out of Rosemont, turned the Wisconsin, did what he did on the Wisconsin Central and what he's done on the MMA, and he's had his hand at this Wheeling and Lake Erie. And they've been trying to, it's a small regional railroad, about 100 workers that runs trains through Ohio and Pennsylvania. And they've been pushing them for years to take a single employee crew agreement. And they've stood tight. They started really gouging them back in the 2000s. They have not had a decent raise since 2008. Wage-wise, what they're making probably, I don't want to get into the they're making like 50% less than what they should be, what other rail workers elsewhere. They're just being extorted into this to try to accept this single employee crew. A few years ago, they actually forced a strike. They went out on strike, but that was brought to an end with a federal injunction. And so it's just kind of still been just trying to economically bleed them dry and extort them into this. I was talking to the local chairman a couple weeks ago. For the time being, they've actually taken that question off of the table for now. But what could happen, but they're still trying to to me, it seems like they're trying to force them on strike. And this time, and I experienced this on the Sioux Line, we had a 47-day strike. When you have a national strike, you won't even have a national strike anymore. The president will come in with a presidential emergency board, and Congress will tell you what your contract is. And that's a contributing factor to how we've gotten to where we've gotten to. But when you have a regional strike, the owners and other railroads around will try to, they will tell the government, stay away, and we'll try, and they'll try to bust. They tried to bust us in '94, and other railroads cooperated with them. And I'm very concerned that if they force these workers out on strike, that this time they won't go for an injunction, but will try to bust them. They'll try to run the railroad without them. Trained managers, there's the subcontracting for emergencies, there's subcontracting outfits, you know, they could, in theory, you know, it's not out of the realm of possibilities that they could round up people to work the railroad, and because it's illegal for us to mount anything besides a symbolic picket line. So I just want to put this in people's radar that while the FRA is doing all this hemming and hawing on single employee crews, while the rail bosses, after the workers at the BN trounced them 5-1, they had to go back and lick their wounds and figure out how they were going to try to ram this forward. In the meantime, this could be a frontline battle. And the consequences would be that if Burkhardt, if the WLE was successful in busting the workers, they could then run the railroad single employee, either with the busted workers or the new replacement workers or whatever. If they succeeded in busting the union, we know that they want a single employee operation. And then once you have a significant regional railroad operating single employee crew, then it's all that much easier. This is how past concessions have happened in the rail industry. They get it on one railroad, and then the bar becomes set. Hey, they're doing it there, they're doing it there. So I just want to put this on people's radar so that if this does happen, that we'll send out a notice, an advisory, and call out for as much public support as possible to support these workers. So I just wanted to raise that now.
This might be outside of your scope, but with all of this, it sounds like all of this risk taking. How can they run the trains? Don't they have to have insurance? How does that affect their insurance to be taking such risks with their trains, with their infrastructure and their cargo?
I can only speculate, but all of that is the cost of doing business. And the bean counters have made a conscious decision that, we roll the dice, we push as hard as we can. We don't, they don't want these kind of disasters, but if something like that happens, it's the cost of doing business, and that's what they pay the insurance premiums for. And even if their premiums go up, it's still better for their rate of profit than paying the benefits to the extra employees, and to whatever it would cost to run the railroad safely, which is possible. It is possible. Make no mistake, it is possible. But I don't think it's possible under the profit system, my own personal opinion.
Yes, you've told us the situation on the Wheeling and Lake Erie. What's the other side of the coin? What can be done about it? What are those workers doing? And what can others do in support at the community level?
I mean, it would be great if they knew that rail unions across the country and communities across the country have their back. That would be great. We're a long way from that, and that's why I wanted to at least raise it here. We've written several articles in our newspaper from time to time. The local chairman, his local paid for him to come to our RWU's convention a few months ago so he could really give us a really good breakdown on what was happening. We'll certainly, messages of support, solidarity, we'll certainly solicit that anywhere that we can from rail unions as well as any community members. Right now, they're just digging in. They don't want to give in, but they're being economically extorted, and it's really it's really vile.
Where should we call? Where should we as communities?
I'll have to get back to you all on that. So if everybody signs the sign-in sheet, we'll be able to give you updates on any of these issues that have been raised tonight.
Thank you so much, Mark. You're going to have concluding comments. Before we go there, Tom, where are you? Where's Tom? Okay, great. Tom's going to just talk about his program on Saturday very quickly.
So the third action of this week is going to be a tour of rail yards and important critical junctions in the Chicagoland area, places we're going to see. We're going to take a field trip by bus. It's a free tour of rail yards. We're going to see where these oil trains go through the city. There's some flyers over on the table over there. You can let me know tonight, or you can register on Facebook or on our website, right? Is that a? Yeah. Okay. And it's Saturday at 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. and it's a two-part. I want to let you know, and I'm going to ask Brian, come on up here for a second, Brian. This is a two-part experience because we're also going to teach the riders how to monitor and mark on a interactive map, and Brian's been developing it. Brian's an expert on mapping and computers, and it's a very simple operation. When you see these, if you see these trains coming through your neighborhood or near your house, you can go to this web page, and it's called, what's the web page called there, Brian? Okay, Brian's going to explain it to you.
There you go. So we actually developed this for the last RWU conference, but now we see this oil train issue is not going to end, so we're going to give a stronger shot at this. What we want to do, we've seen from Mark's comments how complicated the world of railroading is. We've seen by being out on the street how little curiosity there is for all of this. We've created a website where people can record their observations and gradually fill out this map, which is created because of the dedication of STAND, I should say, and they're the only ones who've tried to map this out. We want to show in reality where those trains go and how many there are, and in that way involve people in getting the word out. And if we, after doing that for a couple of months, my proposal is to make a poster in collaboration with all of you with the language and the imagery that we decide, and distribute this poster massively in the Chicagoland area. And it won't have 10 sightings on it. We should get to where we have at least 100 sightings on it before we do that. And when we do that, we can distribute it, first of all, to all the people who made those sightings, but more crucially, we can figure out a strategy to try to show people what is the meaning of this, this situation, and that there is behind the blast train map, there's an everyday reality that's being, that hundreds of people are bearing witness to. I mean, that's the project here. So if everyone can do that themselves, report their sightings, and try to pass it on to a few people, we can get to making that poster, and with the poster we can reach, I think, a lot more people, if people agree that this is a good idea. I'm willing to bottom line this project, produce the poster, and do it in collaboration with all of you.
Great, great. There will be a little bit of climbing involved. There will be a little bit of walking involved. There will be a little bit of trespassing. No, I didn't say that, did I? All of the above is going to take place, and it's really exciting. Bring a lunch if you're going to come along, or we're going to stop at a park where there's a burrito place right across the street. We'll be able to talk about things. Charlie's going to be with us as an expert.
Bring water?
And bring water. Maybe we'll bring some water. We could probably provide that. There is a $10 cost for the bus, a donation to pay for the bus. So we hope we see you Saturday morning. It begins at 845 West Cermak. There's parking all around there just off Halsted. You could get there by the Halsted Street bus, the Cermak bus, or the Orange Line's just a few blocks away. Thank you.
Yeah, this is for Brian. Some of us have been trying this for quite some time as far as spotting the trains. The only thing is, if the train is going any kind of speed at all, it's really hard, and especially if it's dark like it is now, it's really hard to tell whether you've got a 1267 or not.
Yeah, well, what can I say? I mean, you can only do things by trying really hard, is the only thing I can say. I mean, this is it. We have to become more curious and more actively curious about what's going on. You can't always get it right, but it is true that trains with 100 cars where you can see this red placard are very likely to be oil trains. Get a little closer, use some binoculars, take a picture and blow it up is also something you can do. Just magnify your picture. I have personally sighted many, many trains. There are a lot of them out there, you know.
This is, that's a really, really good suggestion because yes, it's really hard to get the 1267 sometimes, but take a quick picture and then you can sometimes see it. And it's really important because Forest Ethics or STAN's map, if you go to oil blast zone, the map is not, it's not filled in. It's got the basic routes, but in Chicago, it's missing a lot. So we really, really do need this, so thank you for doing it. So Mark is going to conclude with a couple comments, and I want to thank you again for coming out tonight.
Yeah, and again, thank you all for coming and your questions and your interest. A couple things. Make sure you get a copy of the program if you didn't. It has both RailroadWorkersUnited.org, our website, but also the HardingDefense.org, which I urge you all to go check out and check some of this out yourself. Two things I want to do in solidarity with the committee, the citizens organization in Lac Mégantic. Number one, I just want to maybe kind of make a informal resolution that all of those here present, that we extend our solidarity to the residents and that we support their struggle for safe railroading operations through their towns, as well as no more incidents like this. So if I could get all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, so we'll call it unanimous acclamation. Once again, thank you very much. As you can see, there's a lot that we're dealing with, and rail workers and communities are very much in harm's way until these issues get under control. So thanks for your support.